Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you. Just a few words to my person who is guiding you through this evening. I was working for the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation for many years in Ö1, and I'm very interested since long and also active in development politics and on a grassroots level. Yeah, I think that's enough for now. And maybe I should mention this. My main interest and also one of my main activities is intercultural philosophy, because there's a journal of intercultural philosophy which is edited in Vienna, Polylog, and I like to make a little bit of an ad for that. Because I think we survived 20 years, which is quite a lot of time, because it's not inside the academics. Right now it's a little bit better, but okay, anyhow, that's maybe another topic. We will have, I think, a very lively and very interesting discussion, because the scope of the topic is broad, and also our panel has a broad perspective. I'd like to introduce very quickly, because everybody will introduce her or himself later. Sandra, so where's my paper? Sandra Monteroso, who is from Guatemala but lives in Vienna and works in Vienna. Tali Einaf, I hope I pronounced it correctly, working for the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. Petra Dannecker, head of department of the Department of International Relations, and Daniel Bacher, Dreikönigsaktion. I don't think I have to translate it into English. It's, I think, one of the greatest, one of the largest development organizations and the most diversified in Austria, NGOs, on the NGO level. Good. I think we should start first with a little introduction of everybody, and also with, maybe in addition, with the question, what did the Millenium Development Goals, I mean this program which was running from 2000 to 2015, what did this program actually achieve? Because there are some data, but numbers are not always, I mean, first they're not always reliable, secondly, human beings are not measured by numbers, so maybe there are some side effects, some problems, we will see. We thought we start by alphabet, so maybe I could ask you for your statement. We will have a short, some time of presentations from the panel, and then the audience can ask questions. And don't feel shy if you're not a native English speaker. I think almost nobody in the room is a native English speaker. Okay.
So thank you very much for inviting me, and also thank you very much for you coming and listening to our discussion. So we got some questions from you beforehand, which concerned how we do evaluate the MDGs, whether we see a paradigm shift with the SDGs coming, where do we see the hindrances, and I at least try to focus on these aspects in the following, and also try to make it short. Before I start to address in this short statement the questions which were raised, I would like to make a general argument, which will be the perspective actually from which I will look at the MDGs and the SDGs. And this perspective is that I do think we need to move away from the established notions of development. I think this is the main point I would like to make. And that's also how I will look at the MDGs and the SDGs. I think we need to get away from the question, the economic models and the social and political institutions follow, which connects actually prosperity and human development with economic development and material wealth. I think this is the main problem, and this is actually the starting point for me to looking at the MDGs and also to look at the SDGs. And from this perspective, I think the MDGs cannot be evaluated as a success. On the contrary, and I would like to just mention some points. I think during the whole 15 years, policy was absent. Inequality actually increased within countries and also between countries. And I would also say that the best which could be said about the MDGs, which from my point of view did open the door for the neoliberal agenda, is that they were absorbing some of the social problems which arise through this kind of agenda. So focusing, the MDGs did focus on the social dimensions of development, and they focused, so to speak, on the countries in the global south, or the so-called developing countries. And what they actually did is that they helped to somehow absorb some of the results of the development policies and also of this economic transformation we observed. I think, and I know that it's quite easy to sit here and to criticize. We have this kind of criticism concerning the MDGs and also concerning development politics and practice for quite some time. I mean, in the context of the post-development, this is discussed in the last 20 years. And also know that the critics are not always offering alternatives. This could be a critic of the critics, so to say. But I do think that there is a kind of political poverty and also a theoretical poverty within the discussions at the moment and within the debates we had in the last 15 years. And I would really like to come back to this point when discussing the SDGs, whether they do present a kind of alternative here. We were also asked to talk about the side effects, and I had some problems with the wording, because side effect implies for me that there is a unilinear common goal, which is to a certain extent development, and then there are some problems on the way, but not questioning, so to speak, the whole model, or not questioning actually the way we are longing for. Therefore, I think it's like with medicine, it's a kind of problematic term. I do think it's much more than side effects. I think what the MDGs did not, and what we should actually do, is to discuss the ideas and values actually, and the economic model in which the MDGs were actually embedded in. And this was, of course, primarily economic growth, and I think problematic is that this was not questioned through the MDGs. The MDGs did not question the values, norms, and also not the economic model. So I think the side effects are actually part of the model, and not so an outcome which was not foreseen, so to speak. And in this way, I also think that the understandings of sustainability was very reductionist during the last decades. Actually, coming now to the second point, actually the SDGs, then I do think...
Maybe, may I interrupt you briefly? Maybe we could separate this and first talk about the MDGs and then about the SDGs. And for everybody who is not familiar with these abbreviations, MDGs are the Millenium Development Goals and SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals. So first we will talk about the Millennium Development Goals, those goals which were valid for about 15 years and now are changed to the Sustainable Development Goals. So we were now in the first phase just to talk about this, to look back to the last 15 years. So following the alphabet,
it's actually a buffer who would...
Yes, I'm sorry. Sometimes the alphabet works a little bit different. So sorry. You should have said something.
Okay.
So please interrupt me if I mix up the alphabet again.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I think this is a very timely discussion. There was the SDG summit last week, and there was hardly anything in the media actually which we were a bit surprised that the refugees are the topic, and it's a very crucial one. At the same time, many of the root causes should be addressed by this global agenda discussed, and the states discussed 3 years in a very interactive process to set up these goals. I think which should be worth at least a line in the news. So, but 2 days afterwards, actually on Monday, there was a news, and I listened carefully in recent days, and it was interesting. It said it's the best story for today. Extreme poverty is just 1/10 of what it was supposed, or what it was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So this was a news at 10 o'clock in the evening, and it said, well, before extreme poverty was nearly 50% of global population, and in the last 2 years, about 200 million less live in extreme poverty. I think many of these data are usually mentioned when we talk about the MDGs. So like HIV infection, it was reduced by 40% in 15 years. Of course, that's a big success. Or if you talk about slum dwellers, the percentage is from 46 to about 30%, the reduction of people living in slums. I mean, that's definitely a success in that sense. Or the school enrollment rate, which went up from about 80 to more than 90% for primary school enrollment. So many of these data are given, and I think they are very valid. At the same time, one has to look carefully, I must say, because if you look at the slum dwellers, if you look in absolute numbers, actually they have increased. So we are talking about 900 million, before they have been less. So, and also saying 1/10 are still living in extreme poverty, I mean, it's 1 out of 10, which is, if you look at the room, I mean, that's a lot, and we are talking about rights, which means that everybody has a right to education, to work. So in that sense, it was not a success, but it's some progress, I would say. And most importantly, if you look, I mean, often it's said China, well, I mean, hundreds of millions have been raised out of poverty, immense, no, in a sense, but in that respect, the ecological cost is usually not mentioned. I mean, we know that in the media, they show pictures of China, the cities are a lot of smog, and people can't breathe. Usually this is not brought together with the Chinese success story, because it is the cost of it, of this huge growth, because many European multinationals went to China and produce now for us. I mean, go in a shop or you can hardly buy anything which is not from China. So we also need to see those points. We cannot just talk about the economic, maybe even the social, but also on the ecological side. And from 1990 until now, I mean, it is, well, we have halved poverty, and many of the other figures have been halved of the MDGs. But also we have 50% more CO2 emissions, which is tremendous. I looked at the figures, I couldn't believe it, but that's true actually. So with data, one has also to be a bit careful, I think, especially with the MDGs. There is a huge difference in terms of region. If you look on Africa, it's also not fair in Africa because the starting point was lower still. In Africa, many of the goals have not been achieved. Like DR Congo, hardly any of the goals have been achieved. So it's also the same in West Asia or Oceania. So there's a regional difference, and the average figures given, which you hear in the media, masked it definitely. And I was also a bit shocked when I looked. There's usually an MDG chart, which the UN is producing, and then they have all the 8 goals, and then they show the regions, and then they show colors, which not met, sufficiently met, or met. But in the last year, suddenly there was a change. It was before, the middle category was always insufficient progress. They have not been met, but also, and now it's fair and good progress suddenly. So the sheet looks very good, very green in a sense. So if you compare to 14 to 15, you think, well, the world has become much better in that year. But do we agree? I don't think so. So there's a lot of showing also, and I'm a bit critical on that, but of course one has to acknowledge also the successes. A major problem, I mean, if you think of 2014 to 15, is of course peace is not included. There was no peace goal, and we all know a holistic agenda without peace, it's pretty worthless, like the current situation shows. So it's peace, there was nothing on inequality, it said quite little on quality. I mean, the school enrollment rate, it increased tremendously. But if myself, I'm traveling also, and we have also school projects, but just because the kids are in school doesn't mean much. The poorer ones, they often don't have books, they have no sandals. Those are the first ones who fall out. Well, and also with those few years of education, I mean, do they get a job afterwards? Probably not. I mean, our experience is. So quality was missing. That's also an important point. But a bit to sum up, of course, I think compared to the 1980s, it has been a step forward. Even though I agree the strong notion on growth, I think I would like to touch it still with the SDGs, whether this is something different. I fully agree with the strong notion on growth. That's very problematic, and I showed with the CO2 emissions. But I think it's a step forward compared to the lost decade, how many call it, of the 1980s. So in the 80s, development was growth purely, and we know the structural adjustment programs. I mean, actually, now we see it in Europe. I mean, Greece is the first European country to really do a one-by-one structural adjustment program in the north. And we see, of course, the huge costs on the social side of doing that. So this was the 80s, and I think the debt crisis has been resolved somehow. But the structural issue is still there. I mean, that is still an issue. It's not solved, in a sense. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Two critics on my right side. You represent more or less the official UN perspective, or maybe you don't, I don't know. But I would like to ask you to contribute.
Thank you. Yes, I already realized that being the only UN person in the room, I will have to represent also the UN beyond my organization. But let me start at the beginning. My name is Tali, and I work for UNIDO, which is the Industrial Development Organization. And in the industry and development, for me, it's very hard to speak about the MDGs because the MDGs were very much focused on social, and they were missing the two other pillars of development, which is economic and environmental. And this is, I'm sorry, but I have to jump to the SDGs. This is what is different now. I heard before I came today that in German, there's not really a word for developed country, but rather Industrieländer, industrialized countries. It's a very good way to see that no country can achieve a higher level of development without industrialization. Industry is what we do, and I mean, I'm sorry, I'll have to jump a bit from MDGs to SDGs. But for developing countries to achieve a higher level of development, they need jobs, they need higher income and productive activities, they need technologies and practices. Daniel is right, because the development in China had a huge effect both on the MDGs, and Daniel, you'll be happy to hear that I have the, if I find it, sorry. Yes. Okay, so regarding the MDGs, most of the progress was in China, where the proportion of the people globally living under $1.25 a day, which was 36% in the 90s, and that fell to a half, so they achieved the MDG. But in China alone, it fell from 16 to 12, whereas in Africa, it fell from 56 to 48, which is a very small improvement. And this is where most of the development can still happen. So the MDGs, as I said, did not take, and this I agree, they did not take, but they were a huge step forward. They were the basis for most of the development agenda for the UN, and they brought together a lot of partners and a lot of attention to what was really important in 2000. And they were a very good basis for the UN to further improve the development agenda into the SDGs, which take the social elements into account. The MDGs are present in the Sustainable Development Goals, but it further expands it to also environment and economic. And this is where, of course, UNIDO will be happy to play a leading role. Just a bit about UNIDO before most of my comments are saved for the SDGs, or why they are better. But UNIDO UNIDO's mandate was decided in 2013, so 2 years before the SDGs came into be. And the mandate we got for our member states in Lima in 2013 was Inclusive and Sustainable Industrial Development, ISID. When we go back to the SDGs, or for those of you who got the paper I hanged out, this is, was recognized also in the SDGs under goal number 9. UNIDO has a lot of technical cooperation branches. We do agribusiness, we do trade capacity building, energy, environment, investment, and technology. And we have services that go into research, statistics, and policy advice. If you want more, there's a UNIDO website, www.unido.org. You're not the only one who promotes a thing here. And yes, I'll leave the rest for later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we already see a little bit the fault lines in this discussion. On one hand, industrialization, on the other hand, ecological costs, social versus economics. So we have a lot. I mean, we will not finish the problem tonight, I can promise you.
I just have to say that industry and environment is not necessarily contrasting. Thank you.
Yes, but up to now, and if you look at China, we get the impression it's a little bit, it's not only contrasting, it's contradicting sometimes. We hope it will change. You might have thought, why is an artist on this panel? But art, as you might also know, is very much concerned with politics, with social questions nowadays. And Sandra Monterosso works on that. So please, maybe you better introduce your work yourself.
Okay. Thank you very much also for the invitation tonight. And I will have to read because my German is really, really bad, and my English is more or less, because I am from Guatemala, you know. So I will read. I am an artist from Guatemala. My grandmother was an indigenous Maya Quechua woman. She inherited me her pluriversality. I am also inside many others who are talking to you at this same space-time today. So I am a pluriversal artist. Dear audience and panel today, with me you are in an interpluriversal expansion space with who I will try to answer some questions. Can we still believe in institutions? Should we continue to believe in the World Bank? Do we still believe in the European Union? Should we continue to believe in the Millenium Declaration? Should we continue to believe in the state? Do we still believe in democracy? I will say no. Today, the institutions can do numbers, as you heard, make statistics, and say that there is less poverty and hunger in the world. Institutions can say by numbers that all children in the world from Zimbabwe, Africa, Nepal, Punta Arenas, Chile, Guatemala, Huehuetenango to Iceland have access to health, education, housing, food security, plants and weather sanitation. Rather, without numbers and institutions, we can say that in many countries, in countries of the global south, where I come from, those countries that were colonized and enslaved, many people still live in extreme poverty, without peace and no social justice. In the rivers, fish are dying because of water pollution. Land is not for people. Cities are growing in a disorderly manner, creating a constant risk and unsustainable way of living. We are facing a global economic crisis, result of the still existing colonial modern global model of power impositions. Thousands of women and children are sold worldwide as modern way of slavery. Thousands of children are working in mines. The modern colonial system is leading us to a global catastrophe. So I have to ask myself again, what countries are doing to address these problems? What are these institutions doing? The problem, I think, is that institutions only believe in universal laws, impossible to achieve, actually. A few days ago, I was listening to Angela Davis' conference at the University of Vienna. She said to the audience, we cannot keep saying that all lives matter. Following her, I can now say that we cannot say all lives matter in a universal way. These statements fail because of these universal laws, because institutions do not believe in people. Social state, public and private institutions believe only in large corporations. Institutions only believe in universal laws impossible to achieve. The problem is that institutions do not believe in the life and dignity of Black people, do not believe in the life and dignity of women, do not believe and trust in the life of indigenous people, of indigenous communities, do not trust in life and dignity of children, do not live in the life of dignity of gay communities, do not believe and trust in the life of transgender people, do not trust in the life of dignity of migrants. They do not trust in the life of dignity and the life and dignity of refugees. The institutions do not believe in the life and dignity of people of color, do not believe in the life and dignity of poor white people. The institutions do not trust in the life and dignity of journalists, do not believe in the life and dignity of social activists. Institutions do not trust in artists and intellectuals. Usually, institutions have been afraid of us. Institutions believe we are aliens, invaders, outsiders. Now I ask the audience again. Imagine a world where institutions are not afraid of artists. Imagine institutions where could be advised by artists. Imagine an institution that could be advised by visionaries and intellectuals. Imagine institutions where could be advised by indigenous leaders. Imagine institutions that could be advised by Black leaders. Imagine institutions that can be advised by Black women, indigenous women, institution advised by women of color. Apparently, we don't need to believe in institutions anymore. Institution needs to trust in people. Not in a universal sense, in a pluriversal sense, where diverse people can be part of institutions, need to trust wonderful indigenous communities of Yala, wise people who care nature for centuries. They have the knowledge, they know how to take care of the lands. Apparently, we need to believe in the past. We need to believe in the ancestors. We need to believe in other different skills, not more Eurocentrical, modern knowledge. And other thoughts are possible because all the different local histories are needed to be recognized and evaluated and appreciated. We no longer believe in institutions because institutions do not trust in us, different people. We can imagine other possible worlds only if we believe in the multi-diverse people who live in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, this was a kind of manifesto more, I would say. And I think it's important it very clearly marks the contrast between the different views on these development goals, because it's really a difference if you look from the global south and from the grassroots level and from the indigenous level, or if you look at it from above, and we in the global north always look from above because that's where we are and how we live. and also the whole question of institutions. I mean, before we change to the Sustainable Development Goals, I would like to address this question of institutions for a short moment. I mean, you already mentioned that the data seem to change. And partly, I mean, I have to address you because you represent now this whole body of the United Nations, which is maybe not correct, but I have to. I mean, how would you respond to this change in numbers and percentage of the achievements of the development goals, the Millennium Development Goals, that in 2013 and 2014 it was not that good, but now as it comes to an end, or it has already ended, the numbers suddenly jump.
Thank you. The part of the problem in the Millennium Development Goals is that the monitoring and the reporting on them was not something that was agreed to from the beginning. And this is, again, different with the Sustainable Development Goals, where monitoring and reporting is very much at the core of the process. Also, what is different between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals is that the Millennium Development Goals were from the rich donors to the poor global south, whereas the Sustainable Development Goals were decided by everyone, all the countries, NGOs, people on the ground. The Secretary General of the UN published a report called The World We Want, bringing together voices from all different parts of societies, from all around the world, indigenous, black, white, women, children, all. And this is a big difference. And again, I think criticism is not a bad thing. The MDGs had place to improve, and in 15 years, I would like to be here and hear what else we can improve further. But I think the Sustainable Development Goals make a big difference in that. Thank you.
Okay.
May I say something to the kind of measurements and the statistics we do have? I do think it's an illusion actually to think that we could measure development. I mean, the question is really, how will you measure development? And we have spent a lot of money and a lot of time on new metrics, on new ways of measurement, and that's also a result why the statistics do differ so much. I think it's a common problem, and the idea that you can measure social change is from my point of view, to a certain extent, an illusion, especially since this kind of talking all about effectiveness all the time and of measurement is also possible because the MDGs actually had a one-size-fits-all targets, so to say, to make comparison. And exactly this points to what Sandra said. Thank you very much for your statement. I think it's very important and to see the dominant discourses, and I think you need to stand outside actually to really criticize them and to also question the assumptions we do have. And one assumption which I think is very problematic and which you repeated at the beginning of your statement is that industrialization, economic growth is development, or is the only possibility for development. And I do think this is really the dominant discourses, and we all follow it to a certain extent. We are all part of it, and therefore a perspective from outside, as Sandra presented, I think is really important also to question these discourses, and also the institutions actually which do play an important role of presenting or of producing and reproducing that there is only one possible way for development. And I wouldn't say that industrialization is necessarily, the only, but it's very difficult to really look out of this kind of discourse or to look beyond it and really think what development could mean and means for certain groups, for different actors. And we have in Ecuador, and we have in some countries in Middle and Latin America, governments who really try to push alternative models of development, focusing on nature much more, trying to implement it, but it is very difficult because it's always against what institution and what the dominant discourses actually promote, what development should be and can be actually.
What is your experience as an NGO?
I would say yes and no to some extent. Because if I remember, I mean, how long was the debate whether growth is enough? Huh? And on inequality, the data was not there. So for long it was said, well, you just need growth and it will trickle down and fine. So now we know OECD and all other international organizations, inequality is rising. Huh? So the data was very important for that. And I think there is a goal on inequality now, and all know this is a major problem. And I'm hoping that for the ecological side it's the same. In the sense, maybe in 10 years. The problem is just time. It is very, very slow. And I completely feel what you said. I mean, our partners portray a very similar situation of distrust in institutions. They don't want to debate with us the MDGs nor the SDGs in a sense. They are highly critical of them. We have also been present at forums like the World Social Forum as our partners are more present there, and their discourse is, of course, land rights, it's on mining, the impact of it. It's the development model which is very destructive. I mean, we have growth in the south, but it's a very brutal growth. If you take China or if you take Brazil, I mean, this is not, I mean, in Europe this sounds very nice to have, if the economy is well, everybody's well, no? But if you're sitting, I think, in Brazil or in China, this is a different story if your house gets scrapped. Huh? Because it's in the wrong place and tenant rights are not there. So I see also that the model is very flawed in a sense, and I feel the intentions are very good, but it needs a bit more of experimentation, and here it's still a bit the old way of doing things. That's my fear. So I mean, we're coming to the SDG debate already a bit, but I see many good elements in there, but I fear in practice, we can discuss it, but I think I stop here.
Well, I would like to add that even at the UN, there are different perspectives. For instance, the World Agricultural Report in, I think, 2010, which was done by the Special Envoy of the UN for Food Security, shows, and I think this is maybe a perspective we could also adopt for our discussion. This report shows that if you really want to have sustainable food security, you should encourage small farmers and not the large corporations. Whenever I look in these international magazines, I always will see Monsanto and all these other big companies advertising, we bring growth, we fight hunger. In fact, it's not. Because even when it comes to the distribution of lands, the large fields, the large monocultural fields, are really destructive, also in sense of climatic change. And this is a report in 2010 from one part of the UN, but obviously nobody wants to listen to that. That's my impression. But I think that shows a little bit, that also underlines what you have said, that it's always about the large institutions and not about the small people. So I think this is also a kind of fault line we have in this discussion. Not only ecology versus industrialization, or maybe not, but also this question of institutions, large companies, and the small people, the small units, and the small living spaces, because ecology is about small spaces and not about large spaces. Okay, maybe if I look at at the time.
Should we come to the SDGs?
Yes, I think we should go a step further to the SDGs, to the Sustainable Development Goals. As the word says, the idea is that this new perspective, which should be valid until 2030, is more all-encompassing and also more inclusive, and and also not only coming from, I don't know, from the basis, but it seems, and it's sold as the better way. So I don't know, maybe at this time we really start with B, with Daniel Bacher. We will have, after this, we will have a discussion.
I mean, I would say the 90s, and there have been many world conferences, and the MDGs have been a reduction of all these big commitments in a sense. And I feel the SDGs are trying now to go beyond these 8 goals in a sense. So it was a process of 3 years working those 17 goals. And it is really now ecological, social, and economic goals. So this is a step forward, especially as the ecological side of it is strengthened clearly. Before it was just one goal shared between the south and the north. Now it's 3 or 4 of them. So that's an improvement, and it's a lot on sustainable consumption and production. So a greening of the economy, I mean, I will say a few words, is also problematic, but in a sense, I think the vision is the right one. There's a goal on inequality. There's a goal on peace, which was not easy to get at, and there's a goal on accountability. So it's a big set of goals, I would say, in a sense, and most are kind of happy in terms of the dimension of it, no? The broadness. Even many of the NGOs, because the critical areas like inequality are there. At the same time, the measurement is still a big question. There's still going to be decided how exactly the goals will be measured. And a lot can be still lost in that sense. If you take inequality, how do you measure it? I mean, we know already that it is not measured by wealth redistribution. It's by income. So in that sense, it's not good from our view, because all the wealth, it's not touched and it's not shown there, the inequality. But still, and you could even narrow down the income side of it. So a lot depends on what happens to the data still. And key will also be the national implementation, because those goals will be global, but they are based on national processes, reports, which have to be presented regionally and globally. And it's a universal agenda. So that's the most important probably. It's for all countries, so also for Austria. And we're calling like for our Austrian goals. There's been a process in Austria as well. We can discuss it. It's a bit slow in a sense, but it's very clear from how the goals are that you need to rework the sustainability strategy that we have. It's something in between a sustainability strategy and the development strategy we have at hand. So that's a big task. And there are some issues like well-being is noted in the new agenda, which is interesting for us. So it's not only growth anymore. But on the other side, it's still a very technocratic approach. I mean, there was the Pope was in New York, and many awaited his speech. And he brought out his encyclica, which many read. And it's very progressive. It's much more progressive than many of us are, actually. And it's really interesting because he says very clearly that just by growth and false solution, how he calls it also, like you will not solve the whole problem. You need to work on the lifestyle, on our consumer society. You need to consume less. So it's very clear what he says in a sense. But if you look at the SDGs, that's not there. It's still everything on we have to produce the same but more efficiently. That's it, basically. And we bring in new partners as the private sector, as we are all in crisis, and money is missing in a sense. And the accountability of the private sector is not there, I would say. So a big point is also how is this agenda financed? And it is the hope that every nation will set up a plan and finance it, but of course poorer countries will not be able to finance the agenda. And the industrialized countries hope for the private sector, the leveraging, how they call it. It's a bit it's a mirror how they do it, but it seems they want to do that. I don't believe it at all, to be honest. And I'm very skeptical on that side. So there are some wins, I would say, on the intention. But in terms of how it should be reached, I'm skeptical because it's not the empowerment of the people we are talking about. So if we have a sustainability agenda and nobody has heard about it in Austria, beyond, let's say, the small circle of people who are working on it, I think it's a problem in a sense. And if the SDGs and let's say our ministries are not opening up and starting in a process and discuss what are the priorities, I'm not so very hopeful, but at least it's a chance, and that's how I see it.
Okay, thanks. So I don't try to repeat what you already said. I think from, if you compare it to the MDGs, you could actually say that there are, and I think this is really important, that there are targets which focus on the to reverse current trends. And I think this is very important because we do have, with regard to inequality, modes of sustaining and producing climate, inclusiveness, whatsoever, there are some targets which really focus the reversal of certain trends we mentioned already concerning the environment and so on. I think this is new, and I also think this is innovative, and I do think we have to distinguish between the conceptual level and between what we do think or is possible. And I do think on the conceptual level there is a certain progress. If it's much more comprehensive. I think this is very important. It's equality in and among countries, which is targeted and also named. It's the sustainable production and consumption, which also shows the connection. And for me, it's not patronizing the North-South dichotomy in a way as we have known that from the MDGs, but also from other strategies. It means that it's not focusing on the developing countries exclusively. I think this is on a conceptual level very innovative, and it's a very ambitious global vision. And I also do think we need global visions to a certain extent. But on the other hand, there are the critical points you mentioned already, and one point is the more general question I would like to raise: will a good transformative agenda matter at all? And that brings me back to what you said about the Austrian context, actually. Does it really matter, since the SDGs are not binding, since we don't now know how it should get financed, people don't know it? I think this is really the independently how we judge the agenda is the question whether it really matters in the world we are here today. And I also think that some of the goals really clash, they don't fit. I mean, you cannot really, if you look at the economic ones and you look at the sustainable production and consumption, they, from my point of view, maybe I'm wrong, but they do not really go together very well. And I think there are many other examples actually showing that. And it's also a question which is not touched, is how citizens can participate in this global policy making. I mean, what is global policy making to a certain extent? I mean, that is a question of scale as well. The sentences like global framework, be truly responsible to citizens' participation, raises much more questions than it actually answers. And a last point I would like to make is really how it gets connected and embedded within national political system. And I also do think what you said, it's not only the private sector, which is targeted as an actor which should be very supportive and also finance some of the targets. It's also the foundations. I mean, if you look how the big foundations are setting agendas already, the question is really how much influence they also do have on the agenda setting. And that's an important point I would like to raise. And one point, getting back to what you said at the beginning, I do think also for us as researchers and scientists, it's really important what you just said, also to question the economic model. I mean, there are diverse approaches about non-market transaction practices which are sustainable. and which sustain many households worldwide. And also to talk about unpaid work and domestic work, the classical feminist agenda, so to speak. I think it's important to bring this stronger into the economic discussion to show that there's not only one economic model, but I think there needs to be more work done, and we need to refresh it and theorize them actually further, also to have counter arguments towards this dominant economic one model fits all strategy we have at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to begin just by starting from UNIDO and what we do, and then move to the SDGs. I think the picture of industry most of us have is a factory with some smoke going up.
That one.
Yes, a dark one. But I think maybe if I give, China. Maybe if I give a few examples on what we do, it will help you understand better what industry is and can do to improve the environment and to improve the well-being of small farmers. First of all, I don't know how many of you know Hans Rosling. He's a Swedish development professor. And there's one TED talk when he asks students, because they all go to the university on bicycle and try to be green and consumption, and they said, okay, how many of you use laundry machines? And all of them do. And how can we, that we have laundry machine, tell other people, you carry on, do it by hand, because you know it will hurt the environment. So on one hand side, we cannot do that. We cannot not let people that want certain things not have them. On the other hand side, we should recognize the challenges to the environment, and we should help them make it better, because this is what we have today that we didn't have when Europe developed, and which is technology on how to do things, green industry, which we have a platform called Green Industry Platform. But also helping part of Goal 9 is to help businesses retrofit the way industry is working to make it more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. UNIDO is also the holder of the Montreal Protocol. We help businesses phase out POPs and pollutants that harm the environment, because nowadays there are different ways to do it. And by recognizing that it's a challenge and we should address it, I think we can achieve more by saying, don't do that. But this is just how I see it. Also, I want to refer to inequality that came up twice. Inequality, or the world, most of the poor in our world today are in middle income countries, not in least developed countries. And inequality is huge. And part of UNIDO project is also we help farmers create a cooperative that give them some strength, because together they have some more power against the big industrial giants. And we work a lot with helping people in developing countries achieve some more value creation in their own countries. Because in Europe, 98%, I think, of the agricultural products are processed. In the process, this is where you create money, you create jobs. In developing countries, the European conglomerates go and they buy all the mangoes and they make it into a juice here. But what if we can do some of it there? Even pulping, that already creates a lot of jobs. The byproducts can be used for art and to feed animals, etc. And from this, I would like to go back to the SDGs, because, yes, I think there is Agenda 2030 holds a lot of promise, but if you ask me if the agenda will make the world a better place, absolutely not. It's the implementation of the agenda that has a chance, because it's not the words. This is just the agenda, and I agree. It's how we will make it happen. And I think because the SDGs are universal agenda, they don't target only the developing countries, they target all the countries. First of all, sorry, I'll go back to industry because this is what I know. Goal 9, that has about industrialization and technology, it means for us here, it means two things. First of all, that maybe we can also look at it for our own European context in creating jobs following the economic crisis, but also look, how can we help the global south? So south-south cooperation and triangular cooperation. What kind of technology do we have that we can share? And industry causes pollution, but in industries where the solutions are also found, this is what generates technology and innovation, which are the two sides of the same coin. Yeah, just 1 second. There is another challenge in the SDGs, and it's the funding. And I read today that the estimate is $7 trillion to make all of those agendas happen. And in a way, I know it sounds very much, and it is, and the money that we give for ODA, the official development assistance that countries give to other countries, is declining. And unfortunately, most of the money is in the private sector. So we have to find a way to work with the private sector, but still keep the interests of the countries. But in a way, I think this funding challenge also created a unique opportunity that because of that, each country is responsible to achieve their own development. So there's a lot more responsibility and national context. And I think in this sense, for example, if I go back to industrialization, it's a good tool for countries to make more money, so they can also develop other sectors, so they can invest in technologies to improve the environment, that they can invest in education. By the way, the beginning of education in Europe was also related to industrialization, because you needed labor force that knew how to do things. And that's still very much true. And of course, we need to do it in a sustainable manner. Again, you need inclusive and sustainable industrial development, helping the people that need the help, making it more inclusive to all the different parts of society and to the entire world, and sustainable, because we do care about the environment and we would like to do the same but better.
How do you see these sustainable development goals and what has been said so far?
Well, I think that these are based also in this same economical model system, you know, like I think it's like the same modern system where all these goals are based. And actually, because if we think about because these modern models are made by categories, and categories separate everything. So you are talking about ecological for one side, you talk about economical situations for the other side, you look for social problems for the other side. I mean, just the agenda, it's all think in a very categorical way of be thinked that lead the same agenda to the same modern line of systematization of these big problematics, which leads you again at the same problematic. I mean, you cannot talk about ecological separate for cultural or social problems. If you analyze it from an holistical way of thinking, for example, you have to be all together, all linked. I mean, it's. And that's the knowledge that I have. That's the knowledge that is in communities. That's why indigenous peoples are defending so much their lands, because they know how to care about these lands. But they are not consulted when the countries want to build mines or they want to build hydroelectrics. They just go there, and big corporations build these things without asking people if they don't want to die because of the pollution of these big corporations made in these lands. So, and that's since industry. I mean, industry is not just the big machines is also, for example, how to create oil. You need to plant monocultives of this palm, which are devastating lands, and then you have to produce this certain oil, and this oil is contaminating rivers in not just in Guatemala, in different countries and all the world. So again, for me, it's like to see these problematicas or links all together. I try to think how to, again, and at least try to give you think in all these things, not in a categorical way, but try to put it in an holistical way. Just to, at the end, try to. That's in one hand, for example. In the other hand, and it's these policies or these agendas, as I said, are traced in a modern line, which has the risk of the dark side of modernity. I mean, of course, modernity brings a lot of development and a lot of, as we know, in developed countries. But also it brings coloniality, which are both sides of the same coin. As you said, I mean, the same coin is modernity and the other coin is coloniality. So it's the same. Since the Renaissance, the epoch of the Renaissance, where America was discovered, for example, it was like the first time. Now it's like the continuation of this coloniality problematics, and that's why I think is the risk. I mean, the risk is to try to go on the same line and go on the same line of dependency. I mean, the poor countries have to be always depend on these big countries or development countries because they know how to deal with development. That, I mean, without asking the people, the local people, what they need to for living, which it could be, for example, has a lot of technology because they know a lot of bio, for example, which now is fashion here in Europe, that you buy something bio food for eating that costs you like 4 or 5 euros, I don't know, very, 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 very expensive. We have it in our country since centuries. It's bio. When we create natural bio products without big industries. You know, so it's just to have to go. It's just to acknowledge this wisdom that is there, but it's so far away. I see so far away all these goals from reality. That
just 2 sentences. I do think it's not to speak against industrialization. You know, I mean that's actually not the point. But it's of thinking development always as only possible through industrialization. I do think this is the main point I wanted to make. And I also think we have to be careful not to romanticize to a certain extent, but to take the diversity into account. And probably also not everybody in Guatemala is against industrialization. I think the question is that we have some dominant models, actually, and that they are setting the standards and the values and the norms, and that's actually the problematic point. And actually, I do really think that there is no, I mean, at least not myself, but I think a lot of people are not generally against industrialization, and there are definitely possibilities. But the question is there political will? How are the power structures actually? And also the way how it is portrayed as the only model for development. And we have just heard that there are also others which are not appreciated the same way, actually. And I think this is the problematic aspect.
Just very short, I wanted to say exactly the same. But I add one sentence. I feel also the problem is not, I mean, the economy, of course you need it, and it's good that there are 4 goals on the economy and to green it. I mean, no problem on that. But who is present in those forums? Why is Zuckerberg and Bill Gates there? Or Bill Gates is always there, let's say this way. And Zuckerberg has been there because he wants an internet goal. Fine. I mean, I understand it from his perspective, but what about all these thousands of small farmers? I mean, they are hardly there and hardly a voice. The main stage have been the big guys this time. It's very clear now. So it's on the indigenous, they're not the small farmers, but also all the informal workers. I mean, if you take Austria as a case, the improvements we have, I mean, it's not big industry which brings the jobs, but it has been many, many small businesses, skilled workers, laborers, small scale. I mean, look at the tourism industry. It's not the big companies that bring sustainable tourism. It's the small hotels there that bring the jobs. And if you look at the goal on jobs, hardly anything has been achieved in the last 15 years. And why? Because the model is flawed. So it's a very much a, I always personally feel it's a bit this American model of, big, thinking big, and then you have a few foundations and they donate and they do something good. I don't think that works at all, and it doesn't show. You need time, you need to think small also in a sense, plus of course the big, that's and then for sure. But
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that I really wonder what are the other way to develop except industrialization, because industrialization actually includes small farmers and those small businesses. You were talking about small and micro enterprises, which are actually the focus of our organization. Also, it so happens, agreeably not by choice, but that the US is not a member state of UNIDO. We don't have any Bill Gates influence. We don't have any Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook in our organization. What we have is a lot of developing countries, middle-income countries, China, Africa. We just had an event of New York calling for Africa to industrialize, where we had a lot of heads of state calling for more help on that. You mentioned before the SAPs, the structural adjustment programs. They were actually devised by the Americans and the World Bank, which I agree completely, and they were forced on African countries especially, but let's say developing countries, as a rule to get money from the World Bank. So you want to get money from us, don't have industrial policy. Don't regulate, don't protect those small businesses, don't protect those small people, because even to create art, even to work the land, you need tools, even if they are basic. When we talk about industrialization, I'm not talking about the big companies, I'm talking exactly about those people that need access to energy. Because how can you produce anything if you have no access to energy, sustainable energy for productive uses, to have light in those houses? I'm not talking about monocultivation. On the contrary, we are strongly against that. We want pluralism. We support each country to develop their own policies. We work with the countries, not against the countries. And as for the rest, I fully agree with everything you said. That's the small enterprises, and it's the small companies that will actually develop the developing countries. And those are also industry.
Just a second, the problem is just they're not there. I mean, they are not invited. Then that's a bit the problem.
Not invited where?
At these big forums, they are not invited there. And even, I mean, we are tiny, not even we are kind of having anything to say there. You know? It is umbrella organizations, big ones, and big companies. There are also the unions are hardly present in the forum, which is also worrying in a sense. I feel the reasonable voices are these small island development states currently, which is very interesting. They propose a very different model of development. They talk about consumption, of course, because they say climate is a threat and we need to change that, and you need to change actually in the north. But there are other countries like Thailand, for instance, they propose the sufficiency economy. So there are a few countries, but those are not the powerful ones, I would say.
So maybe it's time for questions from the audience. I think we could go on for just a while because there are lots of questions which are not addressed. For instance, this whole question of trade agreements, which is one of the most crucial tools which brings inequality and this difference between the North and the South, for instance. And also the question of changing of lifestyle and this strange word of justice, which is completely missing from the development goals. I mean, you can interpret it that it's in it. In the encyclical of the Pope, it's mentioned, but it's not in the development goals. And justice seems to be a very dangerous word in between. If you look who is using it when, it's very interesting to follow that. Okay, but anyhow, I suppose there are lots of questions. There was already one half an hour ago, please.
And I have to inform you we are recording, and if you don't want to have your comment or your question on the recorded, please give me a sign and we won't put it online definitely. Und es ist auch möglich, die Fragen auf Deutsch zu stellen, wenn Sie möchten. Frau Mahold wird sie übersetzen.
Thank you very much. My name is Aladdin. I'm a student of International Development Institute. I have actually 2 questions and 1 comment, if you allow me. The first one, you have mentioned that there is 50% increase in gas emission. And ironically, what we are seeing is 1 out of 10 people suffer from poverty. So this raises a question, do we have a need to increase and encourage CSR programs so that, I mean, we can encourage the big companies, the industry, because 50% of increase in gas emission, that means more industry, that means more economic growth, okay? So when we have an economic growth, we should have also more CSR initiatives. And do we need a framework? I mean, it's not, I mean, not just to say, oh, okay, it's nice to have CSR, but more a kind of political, a kind of an initiative by UN and governments, okay, to encourage CSR. Because I remember that I've read in a book, it's in the life of CEOs, one CEO says that CSR is the license for us to operate in a community. So this is the first question. I would come to the comment to the artist question about the institutions. And yes, I would agree with you, okay, that institutions now are less effective. Of course, we cannot say we don't need institutions, because we cannot say that I will cross the ocean without a ship. I need a ship to cross the ocean, okay? And we need institutions to lead our development. We need institutions to lead our growth. We need democracy, okay? But we need, above that, visionary leaders who would lead those institutions in the right direction, with vision, with a clear vision, with a strategy that is implementable. Because it's not only enough to have a strategy, but we need implemented strategy, and a strategy that is implicable. Okay, so this is my answer to you. Again, I would come to UNIDO. I think. Sorry, I was trying to keep all these questions. I'm trying to be patient, so excuse me. Don't you think that it's very important to encourage creative people and creative employees, not only to say, well, it's our motto to encourage people, but also to help them. I know, for example, in all companies, okay, when somebody applies for a job, the first selection is done by a computer. And many creative people are the sacrifice of this dumb computer system, and they are left without a job. Whereas the people who may have somebody in the organization who can tell them what are the job requirements are, and they can engineer their CV as per the recommendation, they are in the on board. So creative people are left behind, and dumb people are in the ship which we are talking about, to cross the ocean. So, for example, yeah. So, for example, I will close this question about creativity. For example, you have mentioned that the farmers, they need energy, okay? But of course, there are creative solutions to face this problem. For example, permaculture. I have attended one time a lecture about permaculture, and it's really impressive how you can use and promote agriculture with less sources. Thank you very much. Sorry for taking much of your time.
Maybe we take one more question, and then we go to the panel back, and then we go back to the audience. Ich glaube, dieser Herr war's.
My name is Zahir Kabe. I have two questions from the discussion round. One from, just a moment, I have the names, from Mr. Baker and Ms. Danica. The first question is about the loud question about the ecological, economical progress and ecology. You have mentioned that there are conflicted goals. You know, I think in the economy there are not conflicted goals. You have to arrange and coordinate the goals together. That's the matter what made also the economic progress and economic development. My other question is about the institution and what the last two speakers have talked about. I think what's the problem in this case is the lack of the power and authority in institutions, especially in international institutions like UNIDO. It's so that in such international conflicts like Syria or like anywhere in the world in 90s, 1 million or 1.2 million people were died or killed through such slums and so vital sports, but there were no any international interventions in such situations. I think that's a big problem. That's a big challenge for international community to act at the right time and to avoid such catastrophic situations. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think first you were supposed to ask
Just
something.
very short to your first question you raised. I mean, I'm not talking about models, you know, and I'm talking about how dominant or the economy actually is. And it's not a question of whether it could go hand in hand or could be included. But the question is how actually the power structures are that these kind of elements are not taken into account. And I think that's just one sentence I want to make. I mean, that's not a question of possibility. It's a question of how it's realized.
Yeah, I think one could discuss long for that, but for me, it's the MDGs have shown that the problem is there as the ecological was not really well taken into consideration, and as the SDGs are showing, and we will see in 15 years whether we are right or not. I think it's a problem because the MDGs have shown it already, the contradiction, but others don't think so. I mean, for me, there's one simple equation. This is IPAT, which means the impact on the environment is population, affluence, which is basically growth, and technology. And this is a very good equation for me because it says, well, if we have more population, fine. Technology can save for that, fine. But what about the affluence? What about the growth? And the efficiency is by way not enough to compensate it for that. And therefore, we need other models. And I think the one model we have has shown it's not successful in terms of data even. So I strongly argue in the sense of sufficiency economy or care economies or the solidarity economy. I'm not saying this will be the model, but it needs more experimentation and at least funds for such initiatives, and they are not there, I can promise.
I made a short comment about your answer, and is that the technology is the key and the key solution for all the problems. You know, when you take away the technology from the solution, you don't have anything in this new modern world. You can't say that, okay, we have to reduce or slow down the growth, then we have better ecological situation in the world. That's not the solution.
I think that's not what I said. You know, I think there are three variables, and if we say population is okay that it grows, I don't want to go into that debate, but we say it's fine that they grow, yeah, and they decide for themselves, then we have a problem that technology alone cannot compensate for the growth of population plus the economic growth. So you need to do it. No, that's simply by data, so sorry.
Maybe I have to interrupt you because this is not a one-by-one discussion. Maybe you also wanted to add something to this, also to...
Exactly. Thank you for the opportunity. I think one thing that needs perhaps to be clarified is that UNIDO is part of the UN and not part of an industry. So we are there to promote the people and to try and help. I have to admit that UNIDO is not really, doesn't deal with conflicts. What we do are two things. First of all, help in post-conflict to rejuvenate the industry, and also trying to prevent it by creating something to live for. Regarding the use of different forms of energy, it's a very good point and one that we are addressing. And please go visit our website. We have a unit for renewable energy. We also have a project on sustainable cities. So how to improve the consumption of city services, including sewage and energy. So putting everything into a package for cities as well. Yes, renewable energy is very important also to reduce the impact on the environment.
I just wanted to say that I didn't say that we don't need institutions. I just said that we don't need institutions as are they established right now, as they have this modern line of established their goals. For example, the panel was talking about technology, industry, and development. These three words are the base of modern thinking, and are the base of the same dominant economical system that actually it's leading the global world economical system. So what I was trying to say with my statement was that we need to go beyond, and we need to pluriversal way of thinking. We need a diversal way of thinking that includes the thinking and the ways of living of different people for all over the world. We have to stop to think that they need help. People don't need help. People just need to be listened. People just need to be acknowledged in their wisdom, in this different way of living. That's what I was thinking, and that's what I was trying to say.
Okay, da hinten war.
Hello, my name is Katrin. I was studying international development and natural resources management. And I can connect to the talk of Sandra. So, of course, I'm an Austrian. I know how a laundry machine, I use a laundry machine, but I still think that sustainability doesn't go together with economic growth. This year has shown all over the world we are in the middle of climate change. We have to forget economic growth. And thank you, Sandra, for being here. I had the luck to be in South Mexico also. I learned a lot of indigenous people there, and there are the solutions. These are ways of alternative living, buena vida, the good life. This is the question how we want to live. It's not the question of industrialization. If you continue with this economic model, we are going into global war. We are into it, yeah? We have to stop it. Yeah, I think, what I wanted to say else? Yeah, I think that's the thing what Sandra actually said, yeah? We don't need to help the people, yeah? It's just domination. It's a continuing path of colonialism since 500 years. Now it has the face of capitalism. We decorate it with sustainable development goals, but it's not sustainable, sorry. We have to make a rapid change, and we have to make it here in the north and not talk about how the south should change. We should learn from them our alternative really living with the nature, to reconnect with the nature. This is our problem. We are disconnected from ourselves, from the people, and from the nature. Thanks.
So, okay.
Okay. Hi, my name is Gabriel, and I just want to say that looking at the 17 goals, most of them make total sense to me, but just I want to ask the board that how would you monitor all these 17 goals regarding that, how would you bring it down on the national level, and regarding that we have nations in permanent competition with each other. So how would you bring it down on the national level and still connect as one United Nations? And another comment on the question before. Yes, I totally agree with most of what you said. Yeah, and also thanks to Mr. Daniel Baha. He said that you can make a lot of changes on a small level, and that is point that goes to my heart, because as a young man, I sometimes feel very disillusionized when I think about how can we make a change, and then I think about all these big structural efforts that some people are making, or I make sitting or lying in my bed and staring on my ceiling. But then you think about all these structures that are so difficult and that cancel out each other sometimes. So yeah, it's a good point that you said, that you can make a lot of change on a small level when you focus on what you as one man or one woman can do. Thanks for that.
Eva, the lady, right?
Okay. He was first. Okay, go for it.
Thanks so much, the panel, for the discussion. I have questions for Mrs. Daneka, Mr. Pecher, and Mrs. Ainaf. Sorry. Yeah. So far, everyone criticized MDGs, but hardly no one actually criticized the SDGs themselves. That's what I have observed. Like you were just going around saying how much is improved from the MDGs and the differences, but you actually haven't criticized the SDGs goals themselves. Mrs. Daneka criticized MDGs for the use of development notion and how embedded the goals are in the neoliberal economic models or paradigms. Yet, in the SDG, I see this pattern appears again. For example, the SDG goal number 8 and 9, they say that you have to promote the sustainable economic growth or sustainable industrialization. So the only difference was the sustainable before the economic growth and industrialization. So for you, are the SDGs repeating the same mistake of the MDGs for being so embedded in this economic growth paradigm? And what are your opinions about a new and revised concept or notion of development? What should it be about? And for Mr. Badger, for the SDG goal number 1, it says that you should end poverty in all its forms everywhere. And because you talk about the poverty statistic of reduced to 1 per 10%, I ask you the definition of poverty. There are a lot of definitions on poverty. There are many, but all of them are very narrow and really Western biased. For example, the World Bank used the definition of $1.25 per day as you living under the poverty threshold. But there are many other societies that do not use currency in the society. For example, some Indian island, they produce the crops and everything. They go fishing and they sustain their own families without having currencies. They do not know about accountant jobs. They don't think that they have to have a job. They don't think that they have to get educated to become an accountant. So they're actually not living under poverty, but according to this Western definition, they are living under poverty because they do not have $1.25 per day to spend, for example. And for Mrs. Tali Ainaf, you talk about implementations of the SDGs. They really matter. But the SDGs implementation, they're very broad that the implementations can be understood in so many different ways. For example, the goal number 10, it says reduce inequality within and among countries. But how? There are many different ways to achieve this. The first way is the developing countries. They keep on, achieving economic growth to catch the developed countries, but at the same time, developed countries, they continue on grow as well. So it will produce a lot of environmental harm, if developed countries do not stop or try to reduce consumption. So there's a second implementation, a second way to implement this goal is developed countries slow down for the global South to catch up with them. This would reduce less environmental harm. So I criticize that the SDGs goals are very broad and they do not define the definition of sustainability, or they do not define which implementation way actually are there to implement these goals. So that's one criticism. And you said that washing machine, you talk about a laundry machine. You said that we cannot stop people from having what they need or what they want, like a laundry machine. But this is a very philosophical question because, you created the washing machine in the first place for people to want. So originally we didn't actually need to want this, but then, there's it, and then we got used to it. So this is the question. Actually, we should force people to change their lifestyle to reduce the CO2 reduction instead of trying to debate that actually we should not force people to do this or that. It's the same question like you go to an isolated island and educate them to want some money, to want some washing machine and to use this so that we produce more or we consume more. And I also think that industrialization cannot be in harmony with small farmers or small villages, because industrialization itself, it includes the manufacturing on a large scale, which big corporations normally do. So they actually, small farmers in developing countries, I do not agree with the industrialization, and I agree with Mrs. Daneka that there's other way to development, not through industrialization, because I don't think they go hand in hand together. Thank you.
I hope.
It's a very short.
Okay, then go on. because otherwise we get so many questions that nobody knows what to answer.
It's basically maybe the washing machine question. So I think the question about technology came up, and I think it's very interesting because on the one hand side you have those portraying technologies as solutions to problems, and then there are others who say technologies might be part of the problem. And my question on the panel, and maybe to the audience as well, with what has technology brought us so far? Yeah, that would be it.
Okay, we have a lot to discuss.
Okay, can I make it very short? I do think we shouldn't polarize. And I think that's the same with the industrialization. I mean, we have gained a lot from technology in different aspects of our life. So I don't think we should always discuss this either-or question, or black and white. I do think that's problematic because it also doesn't help to solve anything. But coming to the SDGs, I don't think it's the same as the MDGs. And what I wanted to say is that I do think on a conceptual level, and that's not talking about implementation, it is much broader and it's much more comprehensive. And I also said that the goals are not fitting with each other. So I do see the points you made, and we have the same social dimension, but we have also targets which take up current trends or problems like environment, and I think that makes a difference. The question is how this is used, you know, and whether and how it is implemented, and that goes a little bit in your direction, because it doesn't, I mean, we can see it actually what happens in the European countries. There is not a big will to change lifestyle, to share, and a certain way of solidarity as well. So taking this as the background, I do not really see that what is there as a concept and which could be a starting point is getting in any way fulfilled.
I agree again. Suspicious. No, I think also on the technology question, I mean, I also try to show the shades a bit. I think technology is important, as I said, but it's not enough, and the data over 15 years has shown it, and we will not increase it so far that we can compensate for the economic growth. And therefore, we have to be more courageous. That's what I tried to say. On the definition, maybe that's an important point, I think, on how you define poverty. Yes, it's $1.25 that the World Bank is using, and which is based here. I feel, okay, we as an organization, we follow a rights-based approach. We talk a lot about human rights, and we support such projects, so it's always freedom from whatever you wish. No? You have a right to most things, and we stand for those rights. So that's our approach. I would say, if you look at the SDGs, there is a little bit of that in. If you say we eradicate poverty, it's eradication, or you end hunger, which is actually really you end it. You want to end it, let's say this way. But on most other goals, it's not there, the formulation. So it's a step in the right direction, but not more. And of course, it's a big problem with, if you take indigenous groups, they have a different concept of development, and that's very clear. So they say, well, I mean, if you bring development, ask us before you bring development. And in that sense, it's also electricity. It's good to have electricity, but let's be careful how we produce it. The indigenous in Brazil will not be saying, let's produce more electricity if we're going to build a dam there. And that's not the way of modernity they think of, and they want to get asked before. So we have to be careful with those definitions.
May I add something? I mean, as you bring the example of Brazil, I mean, it's always the question for whom are things produced? The dams are produced not for the indigenous people, but for the huge fabric industries which are thought to be set up. And also technology in itself is not the problem. The problem, and you can see this in history, is technology combined with capitalism. So it's the commodification of things which makes the problem finally. And I think this should be also to be taken into consideration when you talk about the implementation of the SDGs. But I'm sorry, as a moderator, I shouldn't have too much of my own voice.
I actually think moderator needs to have their own voice, and I think all of us are entitled to our own voice. I want to just make some, just to make sure we all understand that the Sustainable Development Goals are important, but they are by no means here to replace your actions as individuals. And the UN as an organization and the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted by the UN. Is there to set a framework, a direction, and it cannot replace the actions we take, because we can do a lot as individuals, And this I'm saying as an individual and not as someone who's here for UNIDO. And I do believe that if each one of us will do the best they can to improve the world will definitely be a better place, regardless of a Millennium Development Goals or Sustainable Development Goals. I just wanted to answer Gabriel. Thanks. Monitoring goals is indeed the hardest part. We have to remember that as the United Nations, we cannot tell countries what to do. We work for those countries, for better or worse. This is our mandate. The countries give us the mandate. As UNIDO, I cannot come to a country and say, do that. The countries come to us and say, we need help in improving our industrial policy, for example, to include more people. And there are the things that we can do and the things that we will not do if it harms any rights. But we cannot intervene without the will of the government. So we cannot make nations change. But nations need to want to change. And this brings us again to individuals exercising the right to vote and elect their governments. We as the UN can help their institutions, for example, ministries, to improve their ability to monitor, to report, but we cannot force them by any way. Just 1 second. And the reason that we haven't criticized the SDGs is that they will only start next year. Let's let them be first and then see what they can do and not do. Maybe we can meet again in 15 years to see if we achieve the Agenda 2030. But I have to say that it might not be perfect, but I find it good. A lot of issues that were not covered, the MDGs did not cover the whole spectrum of development. The SDGs try to, inequalities were not mentioned, and now they take a goal of their own. And also, 1 second. The difference between the MDGs and SDGs is not only adding the sustainable before the economic dimension, it's adding the whole economic dimension that was hardly there in the MDGs, which were mostly social based. And again, it comes because countries need the money to implement them. So I think you want to answer. I can see the...
I just want to add a little bit about your question about technology, what technology brings us. And I think, I mean, as I said, I mean, the system, it has two sides of the same coin. I mean, you have modernity, coloniality at the same time in this global system actually, leading all the world. But I think, we have it, it's there. I mean, if you go to indigenous communities, also they have cellulars, they have TV. I mean, it's not that they are isolated completely from the world. I mean, they are connected, they have internet, they check their emails, everything. So, I mean, technology brings a lot of things like communication, like many, many things. But the risk of this, like, as I said, the dark side of all these modern system, colonial global system is commodity. Because commodity at the end brings slavery, because you need, for have commodity, you need slavery in the world. So the risk of all this modern technology industry development is actually commodity. So and that is linked again at the change the way we are living, and to rethink in our ways of living, how am I wasting energy for my communities in my own house, for example. So, for example, I have a washing machine, again, not the washing machine, but I don't wash all my clothes in the washing machine. I do a lot of hands. I don't have what did you say, dishes machine in my apartment here, dish machine? Dishwasher. I don't have it in Vienna, and I don't have it in Guatemala. So I said, why should I have it in Vienna, that is in a modern country, if I don't have it? I don't need it, So there's a lot of things that you can think in your modern way of living, commodity living, how you can change this. These are small changes in your way of living, but actually can bring us big changes. And these small changes that linked all these things like modernity, coloniality, power, poor commodity in all the world, to to underline these differences, these inequalities around the world, to change it at the end. But we have to start with our changes, with our friends, with communities, and etc.
Moment, I just want to say something. I have to look, one of my jobs is to check the time, and it's 9 o'clock, which means we could sit here until midnight, and I'm sure we would have a wonderful discussion, but we have to somehow come to a close now. So I would like to ask to raise your hands if you want to say something and to add something to the discussion. 1, 2, 3. Okay. These people, please now speak up, and then we will have a final round, because then it will be 9:30.
Thank you for your very interesting presentations. My question relates to the Austrian context, and Mr. Bacher touched upon that briefly. And I was wondering, with regard to the making of plans for implementation in Austria, who is leading that process? Which bodies, maybe which governmental bodies are leading it? Are businesses and NGOs involved in any way? Are there discussions about the responsibilities of the individuals, for instance, like Mrs. Einaf touched upon? Thank you.
I'm a visiting PhD student in the Department of Development Studies, University of Vienna, directed by Professor Dannecker, and this is an honor for me. But my specific question is from Ms. Tylee, I know from the UN, I think. In 2009, I have a very problematic and challenging presidential election in Iran, and one night in a live TV show or live TV program, the two presidential candidates have a discussion, very polemic discussion about the rate of inflation in Iran. One of them show to the people a diagram that the rate of inflation, one of them that was the president on that time, that the rate of the inflation in Iran is about 10%. And another show us that that was from the opposition that no, the rate of inflation is about 40%. And all the Iranian people know that on that time that the very of the statistical data that released and produced by for example, the Central Bank of Iran or the Statistical Data Center are not correct. They are completely fake. So my question is that why and how you easily trust to the data organization or statistical organization, for example, in my country and the countries that have a problem with the bureaucratic system or economic system. Thank you very much.
Da hinten war noch jemand. Genau, die Dame. Ja.
Thank you. My name is Madeline, and first of all, I would like to thank the organizers because this is such a great, diverse panel. Usually you don't see artists sitting next to a representative of UNIDO. It's so great, really. I think this would be a great way to continue talking about the SDGs. So my question would be, the SDGs should be equally valid for developed and developing countries. My maybe we will see a shift also in the way how the institutions also represented here at the panel now have to act. And my question would be, first, how will you get the broad public on board, like myself, just as a somebody living in Vienna? And the second question would be, will we see more of UNIDO? Will we see more of DKA and other NGOs working in development cooperation, working on the SDGs here in Austria, in Vienna? Thank you.
Okay, then this. Okay. We just collect all the voices now.
First of all, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. Oh. My name is Victoria, and I'm a student of international relations in Vienna. Oh, relations, sorry, development.
I insist on development.
Yeah, development. And I'm also an intern within the UNIDO. Well, during my internship, I saw that UNIDO is really a helpful organization. So it has its you're not on this social development, but on technical and environmental development. I'm within the environmental branch. And so I see that it helps to the developing countries and also to the countries which economy is in transition, like my one. I'm from Ukraine, so I'm not from developed and not from developing country, and so I'm just like looking at it from the south side. And I didn't want to put any questions, just I wanted to say that so it was very interesting, and critique is very important. Of course, it must be in each project, but we still, our world needs such organization like UN and its divisions, and yeah, it's very good that they're existing, and at least they're trying to do something better. And also I wanted to say about the diversity. So within the UN, diversity matters. So it's a very high point. And maybe that there are so many countries with different backgrounds of development. Maybe they should not be all the same, and this diversity should not be changed, but only improved. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much for this evening.
So it sind noch zwei short, and there is also one more.
So, yeah, Mr. Anaf, the good news that there are laundry machines now that need no energy consumption, without energy. It's manual, which is good. So the question is, I mean, there is also, I think, another point which is hindering the sustainable development and innovation, which is corruption. I think in many countries, corruption is a major issue. Like, look, for example, as you have mentioned, the Syrian crisis, okay, that is affecting refugees here, was one of the reasons of this, that 70% of the Syrian economy was in the hand of one person, and that has evolved the situation. Thank you very much.
Der Herr noch da hinten, und dann machen wir eine Schlussrunde.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, and thanks moderator and the participant. I would like to put a comment about the MDG and SDG, more or less, or are similar, and some extension of MDG. So I'm from Bangladesh, and what I think about the MDG or MDGs that are particularly aimed at developing countries mostly, and the problem is what I found actually in MDG and SDGs also. The UN is promoting development everywhere. Like in developing countries particularly. But what is the greatest missing point is that there is no words about like governance. This is the key issue, I think. For example, if the governance, I mean, the government or the organization, the institution is, I mean, fair enough, and their political will is enough for the development of a country, so it would be, I mean, easily achievable for the MDG and SDGs. And my second, comment about the implementation strategies also discussed by the panel and the audiences also. The strategies, I think, or what I read about in some books of the MDG advisor of the UN Secretary General, Jeffrey J. Sachs, he also, identify the crisis. These strategies are actually, developed by the graduates or the highly qualified professionals from basically Harvard, some kind of high institutions, not from the developing world. So actually they cannot understand what should be the exact strategy or the proper strategy to implement this, target in the respective societies. So my point is, so we have to listen from the bottom, not only from the top. Thank you very much.
So one more, but please, very short.
Yes, I'm sorry to speak again. Yeah, I make it short, but I forgot one point before. Geht das nicht mehr? Oh, yes. Why I mentioned this before, that I'm from Austria and I use a laundry machine. Because I was traveling other parts and I didn't use a laundry machine. And in Mexico, there is the initiatives of appropriate technologies. There I learned to know the bicycle machine, where you use a bicycle. So it's also good for our body, where many people are overweight, to produce energy. So there are permaculture, there are a lot of alternatives, but it's true, we cannot expect a change to sustainable development from institutions in a capitalist system. We have to organize ourselves as people to really make it sustainable.
Thank you very much for all the contributions. I would say we go now the reverse order. We start with you and we finish finally with Daniel Bacher.
Okay.
And this is the closing comments, please.
Okay. Well, I just want to add that the changes start with us. We have to start changing our way of thinking. That's very important, because if we think in a very universal way of thinking, we are always going to be repeating the same system that the institutions are giving to us in all the world. So we have to start changing this way of thinking and try to start acknowledging what other way of thinking we have, or we can reach, or we can research, or we can learn, or there's many alternatives. So I leave you with the invitation to start changing those way of thinkings that are attached on your mind, and try to link yourself for all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will start by referring to the comments we heard, and then I'll have my closing comment. How to trust national statistics. It's a very valid point, and first of all, we have to trust governments, for better or worse. It's not a perfect world, but that is part of what we put under national ownership. If the country wants to develop, they will also look at how to improve it. So whether it's 10 or 40, if they can show that it's improved, it's already a way to look at it as well. But it brings me back to the governance that I will refer to in a second. Madeleine, how to bring people on board and to see UNIDO and Austrian NGOs working together. The UN as a whole, I'll leave UNIDO for a second, has a Global Goals campaign. If I'm not mistaken, it's under globalgoals.org. That It's a big campaign to try and reach out to as many people, because having your opinions is important for the UN and is important for the process, even now when the goals have been identified. In order to actually implement them and make them happen, we need all of you. And through you, your governments, because you have also the power to influence that. And on a small scale, I was actually talking with Daniel before that we have a scope of working together, and I mean, we pursue it in many different ways, but for example, President Fischer will be attending our general conference at the end of November. So I think that's a pretty good example. I was happy to have someone who's been to UNIDO, because I think you have a very different perspective of what UNIDO does when you actually, after you have looked into our website, and especially if you've been there, on what UNIDO tries to do in order to meet all those challenges for the environment, for inclusive, for more people. So thank you for your comment. It's nice to have it from the outside. Corruption hindering development, of course, it's a major block for development. It's not really within what UNIDO does, but I did take a look. It also goes with the governance. And Goal 16 has provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. We can question how much we can make it happen, but the fact that it's recorded on paper is the system trying to acknowledge that it's a problem that we have to address. And this is the role of the goals, to make us look at those things and try to address them. And whether we'll succeed and to what extent is yet to be seen. But I think it shows that it is important for development. Absolutely. You're both very right. And I think the SDGs are different than the MDGs, that they did include the bottom-up approach. They were no longer, the MDGs were a very small group of countries that decided of what the goals, and they gave it to the UN, where the SDGs included NGOs, civil societies, voices from all around the world, which is another thing that I'm proud of. And just as a closing remark, in case you haven't noticed, I really love my work. And I did join the UN to try and help. And I think UNIDO also tries to do that on the organizational level. But if any change is to be, is you, because most of you are younger than me. And I think also as individuals, we have the power to change. And this is why, for me personally, it's so important to be here today and to listen to you. Not only to speak, but also to hear what actually interests people and maybe your suggestion on how to make our operations better. And I thank you for that. Thank you.
I do think the problem is probably the trying to help, because as far as I understood, it's always the question whether the people want to be helped. And we have discussed that. I do have problems also with this. We do have to change, I mean, this kind of individualization. And I never thought that I will really come back to the point, hearing myself saying that we also have to think about structures. You know, it's not just the question that we have to change ourselves and whatever. I think we also have to think about ways how to organize and how to get together and to really actually change all those structures. I think that's as important than not using the washing machine. I mean, the question is really, you know, that I think we will need different kind of strategies to really maybe also initiate change. And I do think the problem is with your comment, actually, that nobody said that we don't need this kind of institution. The question is really on what basis they are working. And it seems that we have observed in the last year that the main problem is how we can measure, and then I'm back to your question from the beginning, or from in between, that we have all this kind of technocratic strategies which are occupying everybody in the organizations and which actually also start even occupying us. when doing research. It's this focus on statistics, on data, and we are not discussing politics, we are not discussing structures, and we are not really discussing the content. And it doesn't mean that the organizations don't want to, but we have an increase in regulations, an increase in technocratic ideas about how things should be, that there's actually not enough space. And I would highly appreciate if somebody who studied international development could also add to this and may also initiate some questions and discussions about what is actually done in the organizations. And it's not to say the organizations are bad. I don't think that what you said before as well, we need institutions, but the problem is, what they actually do and where they do see and embed themselves.
There have been many points, and it would continue to dialogue, which is great. But I try to limit myself a bit on the Austrian situation and the next steps, and also from our role there. I think on the Austrian context, it's quite clear. I mean, there is the Foreign Office, which is responsible basically for all foreign issues, among them the SDGs. But in that case, of course, it is about development and environment. So it's also the Environmental Ministry, which has been in the lead since 3 years, since Rio Plus 20. So the two ministries have been the moderators, but now it has gone to the office of the Chancellor, because it's more ministries which are affected. It was the most recent step, so they are doing now kind of a stock taking and say, okay, it's not only about our priorities, it's about 17 goals, and what is about Austria, the priorities, and what is beyond, which is international development. So there are we at the moment, basically with them. I'm a bit critical when I hear we have to trust the government. I think nothing will happen if we trust them. So we have to watch them very closely. And we have to challenge them. And I think we also empowering them to some extent. So maybe sometimes I feel like a therapist with them, because they're not talking to each other, and it sometimes needs a bit of a push that you talk to each other and try to solve it. So I think it's also for them a learning process, which I must honestly say. So it's quite complex and it's new. So there's some hope in that, but at the same time, my big fear is that it gets very technocratic in a sense. There's no money now, the refugee crisis, so it's the same money actually, which they say is for the refugees, for development, and for the multilateral institutions, UN and OECD. And it's less money, and they are not putting forward more. And this is really difficult, so you might end up with a new report nobody reads. So I see it as a chance, but of course it needs always active citizen, and otherwise we will not move forward. But I think it's a chance to move a bit beyond this small development aid paradigm with new actors. Also this forum I find excellent because it's not usual. So I mean, we as an organization, we're looking forward to Paris now. So it's the climate conference, and we have like a pilgrimage where we walk from Vienna to Salzburg, and others walk further to Paris. So that's an idea. And then there's like a social media campaign which is called the Earthman, which is a superhero actually who lost his superpowers, and he's searching for friends and supporters and solutions, and he finds them everywhere. So that's an idea we're currently working on. And of course, we support our partners in the program work, and it's always more and more networking. So among them, actually, so they are campaigning themselves. They do quite a lot they do climate campaigns actually in their countries, and they criticize us. So actually, the development world has changed a lot, I must honestly say, and it's going away from a northern club of donors to a sort of more partnership-oriented way of thinking, and it's an interesting process. We don't know where it leads to, but that's what we are trying and experimenting with. But we are not the state, and we are not the market. We try to, and we have many cooks. I mean, it's the Catholic Children's Movement with the dioceses and a lot of youth involved in the children. So, yeah, I put my energy in, and others do as well.
So thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. I would like to quote one of the officials of the city of Vienna. I mean, he said it in different circumstances, in different context, but he said, just so talking, well, maybe we are in a system change. And I think that's true. I mean, I was surprised to hear this from him, but I think we are really right now in a huge change of systems. We do not know where to go or where we will end up. But if you sit in your chair, it's also something you do. So please get up and try that you go and move ahead in which direction ever you think it's reliable. And the other thing is what came up through this discussion, I think, is the diversity of the perspectives and therefore the necessity of a very thorough dialogue between people on all levels. Okay, but I have one more task to fulfill, that is to invite you to a treat of bread and wine as sustainable as Depot could get it. So it's waiting outside in the coffee shop, and I wish you all a very nice evening and all best, and thanks for the panel.
And thank you, Eva.